Sophie sat quietly at her desk, nervously fidgeting with the edge of her notebook. The day had come, the day of the school talent show, and she could feel the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on her. She had decided to sign up at the last minute, her nerves pushing her to make a bold decision. It was her chance to show the world a part of herself that no one truly knew. Her friends had been teasing her for weeks. They had heard her mention it in passing, a vague, almost half-hearted idea that she was going to play a song at the talent show. They didn't take it seriously, but Sophie felt different about it. She had always kept her piano skills hidden, playing only for herself and her mother. But this was a chance to do something for her mom, to give her a performance that would finally make her proud. "Are you sure you want to do this?" One of her friends had asked the day before the show. "You know, you've never really played in front of anyone. What if you mess up?" Sophie had only smiled and nodded. She wasn't sure how it would go, but she was determined to try. The song she was planning to play was a special one that her mother had always wanted to hear. But Sophie had never been brave enough to perform. It was a beautiful piece, intricate and challenging. And Sophie knew that if she could play it just right, it would make her mom's dream come true. But the more she thought about it, the more her doubts grew. What if she wasn't good enough? What if the crowd laughed? What if she failed? As she walked into the gym where the talent show was being held, her stomach churned with nervous energy. The gymnasium was buzzing with excitement. Students were gathered in groups, talking and laughing as they prepared for their performances. Some of them were juggling, others were practicing dance moves, and a few were even warming up their voices for their singing acts. But Sophie wasn't like the others. She wasn't loud, and she didn't draw attention to herself. She was the quiet girl who blended into the background. No one knew she had a hidden talent. "I can't believe you're actually doing this, Sophie," her friend Rachel said, glancing at her with a playful smirk. "You sure you don't want to back out?" "You'll look silly if you mess up." Sophie felt her face flush, but she stood her ground. "No, I'm going to do it," she replied quietly, her voice firm but uncertain. She didn't want to let her mom down. After everything her mom had done for her, she wanted to give her this gift, this one performance that would show her how much Sophie loved her. As the show began, Sophie found herself sitting in the audience, watching the first few performances. The spotlight shone on the stage as the first contestant took their turn. A group of students performed a dance routine full of energy and synchronized moves. The crowd cheered and clapped, their excitement filling the room. Sophie couldn't help but feel a little out of place. She wasn't a dancer, and she wasn't a performer like the others. She was just Sophie. The next act was a singer, and the girl had a beautiful voice. As she sang, Sophie's heart fluttered, but the nerves inside her only grew stronger. She thought about her own performance. What if she messed up the piano piece? What if no one cared about what she had to offer? Everyone in the gym seemed so confident, so sure of themselves, and here she was, feeling smaller with every passing second. Rachel leaned over, her voice low. "You're up next, right? You sure you're ready?" Sophie nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yeah, I'm ready." But even as the words left her mouth, doubt crept in. What if they all laughed? What if the song was too hard for her? She could already hear the mocking voices in her head, the whispers of her classmates making fun of her for trying something so ambitious. But she had promised herself, and she had promised her mom that she would do this, no matter what. When Sophie's name was called, she felt her heart skip a beat. Her palms were sweating, and her legs felt like jelly as she stood up from the seat. The lights in the gymnasium suddenly seemed too bright, and she squinted as she walked toward the stage. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, some with curiosity, others with amusement. She knew they didn't expect much from her. After all, she was just the quiet girl who always kept to herself. They probably thought she'd be playing a simple song, something easy and unremarkable. She reached the stage, and as she sat down at the piano, her mind raced. The crowd fell into an expectant silence. Sophie adjusted herself on the piano bench, trying to steady her nerves. She placed her fingers on the keys and took a deep breath. She could see her mom sitting in the front row, her face filled with hope and love. That was all Sophie needed to keep going. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the room fade away. She could hear the faint rustling of her friends in the audience, still skeptical, still unsure about what was about to happen. But But Sophie didn't care. She wasn't doing this for them. She was doing it for her mom. The first few notes came out hesitantly, and Sophie felt her heart race. But as she continued, the music began to flow more naturally. The song was difficult, yes, but Sophie had practiced it over and over in secret, determined to master it. She had spent countless hours in the living room, late at night when no one was awake, letting the music fill her mind and soul. At first, the crowd was quiet. Sophie wasn't sure if they were surprised by the complexity of the song or just unsure of what to make of her performance. The awkwardness hung in the air, but Sophie pushed through. She focused on the music, her hands moving effortlessly across the keys. The nervousness was still there, but it began to fade as the rhythm of the song took over. As Sophie reached the more challenging part of the piece, she felt a rush of adrenaline. This was at the moment when everything could go right or wrong. She had to play perfectly, not for the crowd, but for her mom. Her fingers flew across. The story of Sophie's piano skills didn't start with the talent show. It began years before, back in the quiet warmth of her home, where music had always been a part of her life, even if it hadn't always been at the forefront. Sophie's mother, Linda, had been an extraordinary pianist in her youth. Before Sophie was born, Linda had dreamed of becoming a professional musician. She spent hours at the piano every day, her fingers dancing across the keys like they were made for the piano. But dreams don't always align with reality. Life got in the way, financial struggles, a family to care for, and the daily grind of survival. Linda gave up her dream of a music career, choosing instead to raise her daughter and support her husband. All while nurturing Sophie's love for music, Linda never pushed Sophie into music. But she always played for her when Sophie was little. The sound of the piano filled their home with warmth, even on the coldest winter nights. Sophie's favorite moments were when her mother would sit at the piano, her fingers flowing over the keys, playing beautiful melodies that seemed to tell stories all on their own. Sophie would sit quietly, her head resting against her mother's shoulder, listening to the music and wondering what it would be like to play like that. But as Sophie grew older, she found herself reluctant to play in front of others. She was naturally shy, and the thought of performing made her feel exposed, vulnerable. She was scared of making mistakes and letting people see her flaws. Her mom, though, was always encouraging. "You have a gift, Sophie," Linda would say, her voice soft but firm. "You're meant to play. Don't be afraid to show the world what you can do." Despite her mother's encouragement, Sophie wasn't sure she could live up to her expectations. Linda's talent was undeniable, and Sophie couldn't help but feel that she would always fall short in comparison. So, Sophie kept her skills hidden, playing only when her mom was around, and never in front of anyone else. It was a safe space for her, a way to enjoy music without the pressure. But as time went on, Sophie realized how much she had grown. She had been playing the piano for years, steadily improving even if she had never taken it seriously. She knew she was good, but she didn't think she was great. The song she had chosen for the talent show, the one her mom had always wanted to hear, was a piece Sophie had learned from her mother's collection of old sheet music. It was a beautiful composition, complex and emotional, and it had always been one of her mother's favorites. The song was called Elegy, a hauntingly beautiful piece that Linda had once performed at a music competition before she had to leave her dream behind. Sophie had always loved it, but it was difficult, with intricate melodies and fast-paced sections. It was the kind of piece that required confidencing Sophie had never felt she had. As Sophie sat at the piano during their late-night practice sessions, she could see her mother watching her with those same loving eyes, full of pride and encouragement. "You're doing great, Sophie," Linda would say with a smile. "But remember, you don't need to be perfect. Music is about expression, not perfection." But for Sophie, the idea of expressing herself through music was terrifying. What if she didn't do the piece justice? What if her hands stumbled, or worse, what if she embarrassed her mom? The fear of making a mistake was always lurking in the back of her mind. But her love for the music and her mother was stronger than her fear. It was during one of those quiet practice sessions that Sophie's mother had asked her a simple question that would stick with her forever. Linda had sat beside Sophie as she played through Elegy, her face filled with emotion as the music swirled around them. "Can I play this for my mom one day?" Sophie had asked, her voice soft, almost unsure of herself. Linda had smiled warmly, her eyes glistening with tears. Of course you can, sweetheart. I know you're nervous, but you'll be amazing. I believe in you. That was the moment Sophie decided to take the leap. She wanted to play that song for her mother, not just to show her that she had learned it, but to honor the years of love and support her mother had given her. Sophie knew the talent show was her chance to make that happen. It wasn't just about showing off her piano skills. It was about giving her mom the gift she had always wanted. The day before the talent show, Sophie had spent hours at the piano, playing Elegy over and over again. She worked through the difficult sections, her fingers moving faster and more confidently with each repetition. But even as she played, she couldn't shake the fear. She had only ever performed in front of her mother, and now the idea of playing for an entire crowd made her feel exposed. She could already hear the voices in her head, her friends' teasing laughter, the whispers of doubt that she wasn't good enough. But she had to do it. For her mom, that evening, after dinner, Sophie's mom had sat beside her on the couch, flipping through an old photo album. You know, Linda said softly, I used to perform Elegy at competitions. I was never the best, but it was always my favorite piece. Sophie nodded, her fingers still gently tapping the piano keys in the background. I know, Mom. I remember you playing it for me when I was little. Linda smiled at the memory, her voice full of warmth. You've grown so much, Sophie. I'm proud of you, no matter what happens tomorrow. Those words, simple as they were, filled Sophie's heart. Her mother wasn't just proud of her piano skills. She was proud of her for being brave enough to try. Sophie realized that her mom didn't care if she played Elegy perfectly or if she stumbled during her performance. All she cared about was that Sophie was doing what made her happy. I'm going to do it tomorrow, Sophie had said, her voice determined. I'm going to play for you, Mom. I'll make you proud. And so the day of the talent show arrived. Sophie's heart was racing as she walked into the gym. Her friends had no idea what to expect. Most of them hadn't even known Sophie played the piano. She had kept that part of herself hidden, and now, as the moment approached, she wondered if she had made the right decision. Her friends' laughter echoed in her mind. They didn't believe in her. They thought she was just a shy girl with a dream that was too big. But Sophie knew better. She knew that playing for her mom, sharing this music with her, was worth every ounce of doubt. She looked down at her hands as she sat at the piano. They were trembling slightly, but she knew what she had to do. She had to play the music with everything she had, her heart, her soul, and the memory of her mother's love. Sophie's fingers hovered above the keys as she took a deep breath. She could hear the sound of the crowd, the low murmur of voices, the shuffle of feet. But none of that mattered now. It was just her and the piano. Just the music. And so she began. The gymnasium was alive with energy, the air thick with anticipation. It was a bustling place, filled with excited students, teachers, and families, all gathered for the school talent show. The stage was set with bright lights, and the sound of chatter filled the room as everyone settled into their seats. Sophie could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes, even though she hadn't yet stepped onto the stage. It was the kind of feeling that made her stomach twist into tight knots. And the thought of performing in front of so many people made her nervous in ways she never thought possible. She glanced around, seeing groups of students chatting and laughing. Most of them were either preparing for their turn or enjoying the performances of others. But to Sophie, it felt like all of their eyes were on her. The teasing from her friends echoed in her mind. They still didn't take her seriously. Some of them had even asked why she'd bothered to sign up for the talent show in the first place. What's the point? They'd asked, clearly doubting she could do anything impressive. You're just going to play a song for your mom, right? They laughed, thinking it was a cute, harmless thing to do. But Sophie wasn't going to back down. She had made a promise to herself and to her mother that she was going to do this. The challenge wasn't the song, it was proving to herself that she could stand in front of an audience and not let her nerves get the best of her. She had spent countless hours practicing Elegy at home, knowing that it would be the ultimate test of her abilities. But performing in front of a crowd, well, that was something else entirely. As she waited in the audience, Sophie's thoughts raced. What if she made a mistake? What if she couldn't remember the notes? What if the crowd laughed? She was already imagining the embarrassment, the way her friends would mock her if she stumbled. The more she thought about it, the more she felt like backing out. But then she looked down at her hands. Her fingers, though trembling, were the same fingers that had practiced and practiced. The same ones that could play this piece. They were the same hands that had made her mother proud countless times before. Sophie's mom, Linda, was sitting in the front row. Sophie hadn't dared look at her yet, but she knew her mom was watching, full of love and hope. Linda had never once doubted Sophie. She had always believed in her, even when Sophie didn't believe in herself. That was enough for Sophie to push through her doubts and fear. She had to do this not just for her mother, but for herself. The talent show started with the usual array of performances: singers, dancers, magicians, and comedians. Each act brought their own energy to the stage, but Sophie's nerves only seemed to grow with each passing moment. She wasn't like the others. She didn't have the boldness to sing or dance in front of a crowd. She had the piano, but even the thought of sitting behind it made her feel like she was about to face her biggest fear when her name was finally called. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. The crowd clapped, but it felt distant, like a sound that was coming from far away. She stood up slowly, trying to ignore the wave of nerves crashing over her. She could feel her face burning, her hands shaking as she made her way to the stage. The spotlight was blinding, making it impossible to see the faces of her classmates, but she could still feel them watching her. She reached the piano and sat down. Adjusting the bench as she tried to steady her breathing, the keys in front of her looked so familiar, yet they felt foreign in the bright lights. Her mind was a blur, the doubt swirling like a storm inside her. She glanced down at her hands, her fingers shaking slightly as she placed them on the keys. It was now or never. She had come all this way, and backing out was no longer an option. Taking a deep breath, Sophie began to play the opening notes of Elegy. They came out shaky at first, her nerves making it difficult to find the right rhythm. She could hear the soft rustle of people shifting in their seats, and for a moment she thought she might crumble under the pressure. But then she looked up and saw her mom sitting in the front row, her face full of encouragement. That was all Sophie needed. She focused on the music, blocking out everything else. The music started to flow more naturally as Sophie found her rhythm. The soft melody of Elegy filled the gymnasium, and with each note, Sophie felt the nervousness begin to fade. It was just her and the piano now. She remembered all the hours spent practicing, the quiet nights at home, and her mother's constant belief in her. It wasn't about the crowd. It was about the music and the moment she had worked so hard for. But as Sophie moved into the more complex section of the song, her mind went blank. The notes that had once been so familiar suddenly seemed to slip from her memory. Her fingers hesitated for just a moment, and a cold wave of panic washed over her. This was at the moment she had feared. What if she couldn't finish? What if she made a mistake so obvious that everyone in the room would notice? Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a split second, she thought about stopping. But then, Sophie took another deep breath. She remembered her mom's words. Music is about expression, not perfection. Sophie wasn't trying to be perfect. She was trying to play from her heart. So, she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music come back to her. Slowly, her fingers started to move again, picking up the pace as she regained her confidence. The difficult part of the song, which had once seemed impossible, now felt like a challenge she was ready to meet. She focused on the sound of the piano, letting the music guide her as she played. The crowd was silent, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a quiet, respectful silence, the kind that only comes when someone is doing something truly remarkable. Sophie could feel the room shift as she played. What had started as a shaky performance was turning into something beautiful. She wasn't just playing a song. She was telling a story with the music. The emotion that had been bottled up inside her for so long was pouring out through her fingers, filling the room with the sound of her heart as she reached the final notes. Sophie could feel the weight of the performance lift from her shoulders. The song was coming to an end, and with it, the flood of nerves that had been holding her back. Her fingers danced across the keys one last time. And as the final chord rang out, Sophie opened her eyes. The gymnasium was still. For a moment, no one moved. Sophie's heart was racing, but all she could hear was the echo of the last note hanging in the air. And then, as if on cue, the crowd erupted into applause. It was loud and filled with admiration, a sound that made Sophie's chest swell with pride. She looked down at the piano, trying to process what had just happened. She had done it. She had played the song for her mom. Sophie's eyes searched the crowd. There, sitting in the front row, was her mother. Linda's face was glowing, tears in her eyes as she clapped with the rest of the audience. She had always believed in Sophie, and now Sophie had given her the gift of music that they had both dreamed of for so long. Sophie felt a wave of emotion wash over her. All the doubts, all the fears had been worth it. The applause continued, and for the first time in her life, Sophie felt like she truly belonged. She had done it not for the crowd, not for her friends, but for herself and for her mom. And in that moment, she knew that this was just the beginning. The moment the last note of the song faded into silence, the gymnasium erupted into applause. Sophie sat there for a moment, her hands still resting lightly on the piano keys, her heart racing. The sound of the audience's applause filled her ears, but it was muffled in the haze of her own thoughts. Had she really just played that? Was it over? For a few seconds, she couldn't even process the fact that she had actually done it. She had performed. And not only did she finish, but it had felt like she had truly owned it. Sophie slowly stood up from the piano bench, a bit unsteady on her feet. Her legs felt like jelly, but the proud smile on her face was unmistakable. She was relieved, happy, and shocked all at once. It wasn't just the performance, it was the fact that she had done it despite all the fear, the doubts, and the laughter from her friends. The nerves that had almost paralyzed her before the show seemed to vanish as soon as she looked out at the crowd and saw the genuine expressions of awe on the faces of her classmates. She took a deep breath as she made her way off the stage, the applause still ringing in her ears. For the first time, Sophie felt like she had done something truly remarkable. As she walked down the stairs and into the audience, her friends were already standing up, clapping and cheering. Their faces were full of surprise and admiration. Wow, Sophie, that was amazing. One of her friends said, her eyes wide with disbelief. I never knew you could play like that. Sophie felt her face flush, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from pride, from finally being seen for who she really was. She had been the quiet, shy girl who always kept to herself. But now, in the light of the stage, she felt different. She wasn't just the girl they had underestimated. She was the girl who had stunned them all with her talent. Her friends surrounded her, giving her hugs and high fives. Even Rachel, who had been the most doubtful about Sophie's ability to perform, was now praising her. That was seriously unbelievable, she said with a grin. I never thought you had it in you. You were so good. Sophie smiled, feeling a little shy about the attention. But she also couldn't help but feel a warmth spread through her chest. It was a moment she would never forget, when all the doubts and insecurities she had carried with her for so long were replaced with something stronger, confidence. But as the noise from her friends and the crowd began to settle down, Sophie's eyes found her mom sitting in the front row. Her mother was standing, clapping, her face glowing with tears. Linda's eyes were locked on Sophie, filled with nothing but pride and love. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. The applause from the crowd was still echoing in the background, but all Sophie could hear in that moment was the sound of her mother's quiet, joyful applause. Linda's face said everything. It wasn't just about the performance, it was about what that moment represented. Sophie had done something for her mom, something she had always dreamed of doing. And now, Sophie could see the emotion in her mother's eyes, the same emotion Sophie had seen so many times as a child. When her mother played that same piece at home, her face filled with love and passion for the music. Sophie walked slowly over to her mom, who was still clapping and smiling through her tears. As Sophie reached her, Linda enveloped her in a tight hug, and Sophie could feel the weight of everything she had been carrying for so long finally lifting. You did it, sweetheart, Linda whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so proud of you. That was beautiful. You played elegy like I always knew you could. Sophie's heart swelled with emotion, and for the first time, she truly understood what her mother had meant all those years. It wasn't about perfection. It was about the expression, the heart behind the music. It was about sharing something deeply personal with someone you loved. Without fear of judgment, "I did it for you, Mom," Sophie said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I know." "Sweetie," Linda replied, her voice filled with pride, "and I'll never forget it." The rest of the talent show passed in a blur. Sophie's performance had been the highlight of the night. While there were other talented acts, no one seemed to have the same impact on the crowd. Her performance wasn't just about playing a difficult piece on the piano. It was about courage. It was about pushing through the doubts and the fear, about showing up for herself and for her mom. It was a moment that meant more than any applause or recognition could ever convey. When the show finally came to a close, Sophie and her mom left the gym together, hand in hand. The night air was cool, and there was a quiet peace that settled over them as they walked toward the car. Sophie didn't say much as they walked, but the silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding. Her mom squeezed her hand gently. "That was incredible, Sophie." "You have no idea how much that meant to me," Linda said softly. "You don't need to impress anyone else. You impressed yourself, and that's the most important thing." Sophie smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. For so long, she had tried to measure her worth by other people's standards. She had been afraid of disappointing others, afraid of being judged. But tonight, for the first time, she felt like she had done something that truly mattered. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about doing what she loved, sharing her gift with the world, and showing her mom how much she meant to her. When they reached the car, Linda opened the door for Sophie and then climbed into the driver's seat. As they drove home, Sophie stared out of the window, lost in thought. The streetlights flickered by, casting soft, golden light across the darkened road. Sophie's mind wandered back to her performance, the way the music had taken over, the way her fingers had moved across the keys almost effortlessly. It had felt so right, so natural. It wasn't about perfection. It was about the connection she felt with the music and with her mom. It was about expressing what words could never fully capture. Sophie's thoughts shifted to the future. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. The fear that had held her back for so long was starting to fade. She wasn't going to hide behind her shyness anymore. She was going to keep playing, keep sharing her music, and maybe even pursue it further. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, a new chapter in her life. One where she no longer had to live in the shadows of doubt. As the car pulled into their driveway, Linda turned to Sophie and smiled. "Are you ready for the next one?" she asked. Sophie grinned back, a feeling of confidence and excitement bubbling inside her. "Yeah, I think I am." And in that moment, Sophie realized that the most important performance of her life hadn't been about impressing anyone else. It had been about proving to herself that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. The weeks after the talent show passed in a blur. For Sophie, everything seemed to change overnight. She was no longer the quiet girl who stayed in the background, afraid of being noticed. She was the girl who had stood on that stage, played her heart out, and left everyone in awe. People were noticing her now, her friends, her teachers, even strangers. It felt surreal, but in the best way possible. The applause still echoed in her mind, but what stayed with her the most was the look on her mom's face after her performance. That look of pride, of love, was something Sophie would carry with her forever. At school, things began to shift. Sophie's friends, who had once laughed at the idea of her performing, now treated her with a new level of respect. They were the first to greet her in the halls, asking her about her music, complimenting her on how amazing she had been at the talent show. Some of them even started asking if she would play for them during lunch or after school. At first, Sophie was hesitant. She wasn't used to the attention, and the thought of performing again made her nervous. But she quickly realized that this wasn't about impressing anyone. Anymore, it was about sharing something that was a part of her. Something that had always been a secret. Sophie agreed to play for them a few times, but only in small, familiar settings, where she felt comfortable. She began to understand that her music was a gift not to show off, but to connect with others, to express things that words couldn't. With each performance, no matter how small, her confidence grew. She started to look at her piano not as something that belonged in the background, but as something she could use to communicate her feelings, her stories. But it wasn't just her friends who noticed the change. Her teachers began to treat her differently too. Her music teacher, who had always been encouraging but reserved, pulled her aside after class one day. "Sophie," she said, her voice filled with admiration, "I've seen a lot of students play, but your performance at the talent show, that was something special. You've got a real gift. Have you ever thought about taking your music more seriously? Maybe even pursuing it professionally?" Sophie blinked, surprised by the question. She hadn't even considered it. Music had always been something she did for herself and her mom, something that was more about personal connection than a career. But as she thought about it, the idea didn't seem as impossible as it once had. Maybe it wasn't too late to follow in her mom's footsteps, to take the gift her mother had passed down and build on it. That evening, as she sat in the living room with her mom, Sophie decided to bring it up. Linda was sitting on the couch, flipping through an old album of family photos. Sophie sat down next to her, the familiar warmth of their home wrapping around her like a comforting blanket. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to start, but then she spoke. "Mom, do you think I could actually do something with my music? Like, pursue it seriously? Like a career?" Linda looked up from the album, her face softening with a smile. "Sweetheart, I've always believed in you. If that's what you want to do, I think you could absolutely make it happen." Sophie's heart fluttered. The thought of actually pursuing music professionally seemed like a dream, something so far out of reach. But hearing her mom's support, Sophie felt a surge of hope. She had always admired her mother's talent, the way she could make music come alive with just her fingers on the keys. Now, it seemed like maybe Sophie could follow that same path, but in her own way. "I don't know where to start," Sophie said, her voice hesitant. "I mean, it's not like I've ever taken formal lessons or anything, and I don't even know if I'm good enough." Linda chuckled softly, a sound that always made Sophie feel safe. "You're more than good enough, Sophie. You've got the talent, and more importantly, you've got the heart. That's what music is all about. You'll figure it out one step at a time." Sophie nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. She knew that pursuing music would be a long journey, but now she felt ready to take the first steps. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be plenty of challenges along the way. But for the first time, she believed in herself, and that belief was powerful. The next few months were a whirlwind of new opportunities and experiences. Sophie began taking private piano lessons, something she had always been hesitant to do in the past. She learned new techniques, practiced new songs, and began to push herself further than she ever had before. Her teacher, Mr. Turner, was kind but firm, always encouraging her to reach higher, to dig deeper into the music. With every lesson, Sophie's skills grew, and so did her confidence. She wasn't just playing to impress anyone anymore. She was playing for herself, for the love of the music. At school, Sophie's reputation as a talented musician spread quickly. Her friends, who had once been skeptical, now proudly shared videos of her playing with others. Some of them even began asking her for help with their own music projects. It was surreal, in a way, to see how much had changed. Sophie had gone from the shy girl in the corner to someone people admired for her talent and bravery. She wasn't just the quiet girl anymore. She was someone who had taken a leap, shared her music with the world, and found a place for herself. One afternoon, a few months after the talent show, Sophie sat down at the piano in the school music room. It was quiet, and the light coming in through the window bathed the room in a soft, golden glow. Sophie placed her fingers on the keys, her mind filled with thoughts of everything she had learned, everything she had experienced since that night on stage. She closed her eyes and began to play. The music was beautiful, flowing from her fingers with ease. As the notes filled the room, Sophie realized something: this wasn't just about music anymore. It was about her journey, about the person she had become. It was about the fears she had faced and overcome, the challenges she had met head-on, and the people who had supported her along the way. She played for herself. She played for her mom. And she played for the future, a future where she wasn't afraid to chase her dreams, no matter how big or impossible they seemed. As Sophie played, she knew she wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. She had a long road ahead of her, but she was no longer the girl who hid in the shadows. She was the girl who had stood on stage, played her heart out, and inspired everyone around her. And now, with each passing day, she was finding the courage to pursue something even bigger too. Share her gift with the world in ways she had never imagined. The music flowed effortlessly as Sophie's fingers danced across the keys. She was no longer afraid of making mistakes or of being judged. She was just playing for the love of it. And in that moment she realized something even more important. She was finally playing for herself.